The Whispering Woods Part 3, the finale. Opening hook, the weight of the past. The whispers had become a symphony of madness, a relentless, churning chorus that echoed the primordial entity's call in every waking moment and every fevered dream. Elias Thorne, once a man defined by his logic, his science, and his academic pursuit of folklore, was now nothing more than a puppet on strings woven from ancient, absolute dread. The glowing sigil on his arm, that emerald brand of ownership, pulsed with an unholy, rhythmic light, a beacon that didn't just guide him back to the Blackwood Forest, it commanded him. He had escaped its physical clutches once, stumbling back to the fragile safety of civilization. But the voice in the veins of the earth was not a creature of distance or time. It had followed him. It had seeped into his marrow, coiled around his thoughts, and now it demanded his final return. The forest, a vast, waiting maw of shadows and prehistoric secrets, stood ready to receive its prodigal son. The journey back, descending into the maw. As Elias crossed the threshold of the Blackwood once more, the very air seemed to thicken, turning heavy and cold with an oppressive, suffocating silence. The familiar sense of damp earth and slow decay were still there, but they were now laced with something sharper, something metallic and undeniably alive. The trees, those silent, gnarled sentinels of the deep dark, seemed to writhe and twist as he passed, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out, testing the air for the scent of his fear. The ground beneath his heavy boots felt soft and yielding, not like soil but like flesh, as if the forest itself was breathing, a monstrous, subterranean lung expanding and contracting with every one of his terrified, halting steps. The sigil on his arm burned with a cold fire, a green flare that illuminated the path he could no longer choose to ignore. And then he heard them, the bone chimes. In the past, they had been a haunting, melodic warning. Now, they were a frantic, discordant clatter, 1,000 tiny skeletons dancing in a gale that shouldn't exist. They hung from unseen branches, swaying in a breeze that carried no scent of wind, only the iron stench of ancient blood and the dust of forgotten rituals. Each chime was a shard of a forgotten language, a syllable of a curse that wove a tapestry of terror around him, threatening to unravel the last frayed threads of his sanity. He tried to cover his ears, but the sound wasn't coming from the outside anymore. It was vibrating in his teeth, echoing in his skull, a rhythmic reminder that he was no longer alone in his own body. Escalation, the labyrinth of shadows. The path, if such a thing had ever truly existed, dissolved into a chaotic labyrinth of suffocating roots and jagged thorns. The light of the sun, already a distant memory, vanished entirely, plunging him into an absolute abyss where only the glowing sigil on his arm offered a faint, sickly green illumination. Shapes flickered at the very periphery of his vision, gaunt, shadowy figures that seemed to coalesce from the very fabric of the darkness itself. Their eyes, if they could be called eyes, burned with an insatiable ancient hunger. They were the forest's guardians, the entity's silent, ravenous children, drawn to the mark on Elias like moths to a dying flame. He could feel their breath on the back of his neck, cold and smelling of old graves, but whenever he turned, there was only the shifting emerald-tinted dark. Every step deeper was a struggle against the forest's will. The vines seemed to coil around his ankles, not to trip him, but to pull him down, to anchor him to the earth that wanted to consume him. The whispers were no longer just sounds. They were physical sensations, like thousands of tiny insects crawling beneath his skin, searching for a way out or a way deeper in. He found himself speaking back to them, his own voice sounding foreign and hollow in the stillness. He was pleading, bargaining with a force that didn't understand the concept of mercy, only the necessity of growth. The cradle, the heart of the horror. Finally, he stumbled into the clearing. The air here was so thick with power that it felt like wading through deep water. This was it, the cradle, but the serene, if unsettling, glade from his first visit was gone, replaced by a scene of pure, unadulterated nightmare. The ancient stones, those massive slabs of forgotten history, now pulsed with the same sickly green light as his sigil, veins of emerald energy throbbing violently beneath their moss-covered surfaces. The central monolith, a towering spike of black stone, seemed to have grown, its surface rippling and shifting as if a colossal, prehistoric heart beat within its core. From the base of the monolith, tendrils of shadow began to unfurl. They were impossibly dark, darker than the night around them, and they moved with a sinuous, predatory grace. They writhed and stretched across the clearing, reaching for him not with the jagged aggression of a beast, but with an unnerving, almost tender embrace. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, no longer fragments of sound, but a single, coherent, and terrifyingly alien voice that echoed directly within the center of his mind. It bypassed his ears entirely, invading his thoughts, his memories, his very soul. "Welcome home, Elias Thorne." The voice resonated, a chorus of a million voices, some ancient and dusty, others fresh and raw, all merged into one. "You are ours. You have always been ours. The mark is complete. The cycle is whole. The connection is unbreakable. The transformation becoming the legend." Elias fought. He threw himself against the unseen pressure, a desperate, futile struggle against a god of the earth. He tried to scream, to vent the sheer, blinding terror that consumed him, but no sound escaped his throat. His voice was swallowed by the oppressive, absolute silence of the cradle. The shadowy tendrils wrapped around his limbs, cold and insubstantial as smoke, yet they bound him with the strength of iron chains. He felt his essence, the very core of who he was, being drawn out of him, pulled toward the pulsating monolith, toward the infinite hungry heart of the entity. Visions flooded his mind, not of his own life, but of the entity's eternal existence. He saw eons of silent, patient watching. He saw the slow, inexorable growth of the Blackwood, its roots reaching down to the very core of the world. He saw the thousands who had come before him, the lost souls whose fear had fed the voice for centuries. He saw the true form of the entity, and it was not a creature of flesh or bone, but a vast cosmic consciousness, a parasitic god rooted in the foundation of reality, feeding on the despair and the life force of everything that dared to walk above it. The final descent, a dark conclusion. The pain was beyond anything he had ever imagined, yet it felt strangely distant, as if it were happening to a body that no longer belonged to him. His frame convulsed, the sigil on his arm flaring with a blinding, emerald light that illuminated the entire clearing. Then, the flare died down, replaced by a delicate, glowing network of green lines that began to spread across his chest, up his neck, and across his face. They looked like roots, taking hold in the fertile soil of his flesh. His eyes, once wide with the terror of a dying man, now held a vacant, unsettling glow, perfectly mirroring the unholy light of the monolith. The whispers suddenly ceased. The shadow tendrils receded, slinking back into the base of the stone. Elias stood perfectly still before the monolith, unmoving and silent. But he was no longer Elias Thorne, the folklorist. He was a vessel. He was an extension. He was just another branch on the vast, ancient tree of the voice in the veins of the earth. His consciousness, his academic knowledge, his childhood memories, all of it had been absorbed, assimilated into the collective, eternal horror of the woods. The Blackwood Forest fell into a profound, unnatural stillness once more. The bone chimes hung motionless in the heavy air, their discordant song finally silenced. But if a traveler were to wander too close, if they were to truly listen with more than just their ears, they might hear it. A faint, new whisper carried on the cold wind. It is a whisper that speaks of ancient power, of an eternal, bottomless hunger, and of a man who came seeking a legend, only to find that the legend had been seeking him. And deep within the darkest thicket of the forest, a new sigil began to pulse, very faintly, on a newly formed branch, waiting patiently for the next curious soul to wander into the whispering woods. There is no escape. There is only the voice.